The scream came first, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet of the training yard. Elena froze mid-step, her bucket of water spilling across the dirt. Everyone turned to look at her, and she knew, even before the elder spoke, that something terrible was about to happen. Again, snarled Garrick, the pack's training master, standing over a young wolf who had failed to shift on command. Get up and try again, or crawl back to the weak one's side, where you belong. The young wolf, barely 16, scrambled to his feet, humiliated. Elena looked away. She knew that shame better than anyone. She had lived inside it for 21 years. Elena was the only wolf in the entire Crimson Moon pack who could not fully shift. She could feel her wolf beneath her skin, prowling and restless, but no matter how hard she tried, no matter how many nights she spent alone in the forest begging her body to change, only parts of her would answer. Claws would emerge from her fingertips, her eyes would flash gold, but the full transformation, the one every wolf took for granted, never came for her. The pack called it a defect. Some called her cursed. Her own father, Callum, the beta of the pack, could barely look at her without his jaw tightening in shame. Her mother had died bringing her into the world, and there were whispers, cruel and constant, that Elena's weakness was punishment for that death, as though the universe itself had decided she did not deserve to be whole. She kept to the edges of pack life. She worked in the kitchens, tended the herb gardens, and mended clothes for wolves who would not meet her eyes in the hallway. It was not the life she had dreamed of as a child, but it was survivable, and survival had become her only ambition. That morning, the pack had woken to strange news. Runners had arrived at dawn, breathless from their journey, carrying a message stamped with a golden crest that made even the elders go pale. The Alpha King himself, Damian Voss, ruler of all 5 packs and the most powerful wolf in the known territories, was coming to Crimson Moon. The pack house exploded into motion within the hour. Elena watched from the kitchen window as wolves scrubbed the training yard, repainted the meeting hall doors, and dragged fresh flowers in from the eastern fields. The elders paced back and forth, arguing over which young women should be presented to the king as potential mates, since it was well known that Damian Voss, despite ruling for 6 years, had never claimed one. He wants strength, said Elder Priscilla, Elena's aunt by blood, but never by kindness. A queen who can stand beside a king, not some fragile, half-formed girl who can barely hold her own shape. Elena did not need to guess who she meant. She kept chopping vegetables, her knife moving in steady, practiced strokes, refusing to let the words land where they were aimed. Her father found her later that afternoon, his expression as tired and closed as always. The king arrives tomorrow at dusk, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. You will stay in the kitchens during his visit. Do you understand me, Elena? You will not be seen. I understand, she said quietly, because she always understood. She had learned long ago that arguing only made the humiliation sharper. But even as she said the words, something inside her rebelled, quiet and small, like an ember refusing to go out. That night, unable to sleep, Elena slipped out of the pack house and walked toward the training yard, now empty and washed silver by moonlight. She stood at its center, closing her eyes, and reached inward the way she always did, searching for the wolf that lived just beneath her skin. Come on, she whispered to herself, please, just once. Her fingertips sharpened into claws, her spine arched, and for one breathless moment, she thought it might finally happen, that her body might finally surrender to the change everyone else took for granted. But then, as always, the transformation stalled, leaving her caught between 2 forms, neither wolf nor woman, gasping in the dirt. She stayed there for a long moment, catching her breath, staring up at the stars. She thought about the king arriving tomorrow, about being hidden away like something shameful, and a tired, familiar ache settled into her chest. You are still here, she told herself, the way she did every night. That is enough for today. It had to be enough, because nothing else was offered to her. The next morning, the pack house buzzed with an energy Elena had never seen before. Servants ran between rooms carrying trays of food, fresh linens, and polished silverware. Elena spent the day in the kitchen, preparing dishes she would never be allowed to serve at the main table, her hands steady, even as her mind wandered to the arrival that would come with nightfall. By late afternoon, the entire pack had gathered near the front gates, dressed in their finest clothing, faces arranged into careful, hopeful expressions. Elena watched from a small window near the pantry, her forehead pressed against the cool glass. When the convoy finally arrived, it moved with a quiet, deliberate power that made the whole courtyard fall silent. Black vehicles rolled through the gates, followed by a procession of warriors in dark uniforms, their postures rigid and disciplined. And then, stepping out from the lead vehicle, was a man who commanded every eye in the courtyard without saying a single word. Damien Voss was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and sharp, assessing eyes that swept across the gathered pack as though cataloging every weakness and strength in an instant. He wore simple black clothing, no crown, no ornamentation, yet there was something in the way he carried himself that made it clear, without any doubt, that he was the most powerful person for miles in every direction. Elena felt something strange stir in her chest as she watched him, a pull she could not explain and did not want to examine too closely. She told herself it was simply awe, the same awe anyone would feel looking at a king. She told herself that, and tried very hard to believe it. The elders rushed forward to greet him, bowing low, their voices honeyed with practiced hospitality. Damien accepted their greetings with polite, measured responses, his eyes occasionally drifting past the crowd, scanning the pack house as though searching for something, or someone, that had not yet been presented to him. Elena stepped back from the window before those eyes could land on her, her heart pounding for reasons she refused to name. That evening, a grand dinner was held in the main hall, and Elena was assigned to the kitchens, carrying trays of food to the doorway, where other servants would take them the rest of the way inside. She was not permitted to enter the hall itself. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself this was simply another ordinary night, another task to complete before bed. But as she carried a tray of bread toward the serving doorway, a commotion near the hall entrance caught her attention. Two young women, dressed in shimmering gowns, were arguing quietly about who would be seated closer to the king during dinner, their voices sharp with barely concealed rivalry. Elena stepped around them, careful not to be noticed, and continued down the corridor toward the kitchen. She did not see the tall figure rounding the corner from the opposite direction until it was too late. The collision sent her tray crashing to the floor, bread rolling in every direction, and Elena stumbled backward with a startled gasp. Strong hands caught her before she could fall, steadying her with an ease that suggested considerable strength held carefully in check. "I am so sorry," Elena said quickly, straightening herself and beginning to gather the fallen bread, before she had even looked up to see who she had run into. "I was not watching where I was going." "Neither was I," said a low, calm voice above her. Elena looked up and found herself staring directly into the sharp, dark eyes of Damien Voss. Her breath caught. She scrambled to stand, bowing quickly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "My apologies, sir. I did not realize." She stopped, unsure how to address him, painfully aware that she had just physically collided with the most powerful wolf in the territories. But Damien did not look angry. If anything, there was a flicker of curiosity in his expression as he studied her, tilting his head slightly. "You do not need to apologize so many times," he said, a faint, almost amused edge to his voice. "It was an accident. Are you hurt?" "No," Elena said quickly. "No, I am fine." She bent down again to gather the last of the scattered bread, expecting him to walk on, but instead, to her surprise, he crouched down and began helping her collect it, placing pieces back onto her tray with quiet efficiency. "You do not have to do that," Elena said, startled. "I know," he replied simply, not stopping. They finished gathering the bread in silence, and when Elena finally stood, tray balanced once more in her hands, she found him still watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He asked. Elena hesitated. She had been told, explicitly, not to be seen, let alone speak with him, but something about his directness made lying feel impossible. "Elena," she said quietly. "Elena," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "You work in the kitchens?" "Yes," she said, and then, unable to help herself, added, "It is where I am allowed to be useful." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with old, tired bitterness. She expected him to frown, or perhaps to dismiss her entirely, the way most wolves of status did when she let her frustration slip. Instead, something shifted in his expression, an interest sharpening behind his eyes. "Allowed?" he asked. "That is an interesting choice of word." Elena's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, suddenly aware of how much she had revealed. "I should return to the kitchen," she said quickly. "I am sorry again for the collision." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Elena." She glanced back. "Thank you for the conversation," he said, something unreadable in his gaze. "It has been the most honest one I have had since arriving here." Elena did not know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and hurried away, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. She did not know, as she disappeared down the corridor, that Damien Voss remained standing there for a long moment afterward, staring after her with an expression none of his advisors had ever seen on his face before, something that looked remarkably, dangerously, like wonder. That night, Elena lay awake in her small room above the kitchens, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. She told herself it meant nothing, that a king speaking politely to a servant was hardly unusual, that she was reading far too much into a few exchanged words and a shared task of picking up bread from the floor. But she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, as though she were something worth truly seeing, rather than something to be hidden away and forgotten. She did not yet know his name. In her mind, he remained simply the guest, the tall stranger with sharp eyes and a voice that had made her feel, for one brief moment, like an equal rather than an embarrassment. She had no way of knowing, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, that the man she had spoken to so freely was the very king the entire pack had spent days preparing for, the one whose approval could elevate a family's standing for generations, or the one whose displeasure could unravel it completely. She had no way of knowing that somewhere in the guest quarters above her, Damien Voss lay equally awake, turning her words over in his mind, already feeling the first threads of a connection he had never expected to find in a place like this. And she certainly had no way of knowing that this single, accidental meeting in a dim corridor would set into motion events that would tear her away from everything she had ever known, only to lead her toward a life far bigger, far stranger, and far more dangerous than anything she could have imagined. For now, she only knew one thing for certain. Something had shifted inside her tonight, something she could not name, and no matter how hard she tried to convince herself otherwise, she suspected that nothing in her quiet, hidden life would ever be quite the same again. Morning came too quickly, and with it, a summons Elena had not expected. Elder Priscilla found her in the kitchen garden, her face tight with barely restrained fury. "The king has requested to see the kitchen staff," Priscilla said, each word clipped with suspicion. "All of them, now." Elena's stomach dropped. She followed the elder through the back corridors, her mind racing. Had someone seen her talking with the stranger last night? Had word already reached the pack elders about the collision in the hallway? When she entered the small receiving room where the kitchen staff had gathered, she kept her eyes down, praying she would not be singled out. 6 other servants stood in a nervous line, and standing before them, dressed in the same simple dark clothing from the night before, was the man Elena now understood to be Damien Voss, Alpha King of all 5 packs. Her breath caught. She had spoken to him so freely, without any idea of who he truly was. Heat rushed to her face as she remembered her own words, allowed to be useful, and the way she had let her frustration slip so openly in front of him. Damien's gaze swept across the line of servants, and when it landed on Elena, something flickered in his expression, quick and unreadable, before he looked away again, addressing the group as a whole. "I wanted to thank the kitchen staff personally," he said, his voice calm and even. "The meals prepared for last night's dinner were excellent. It is rare to find such skill in a pack this size." The servants murmured their thanks, bowing slightly, clearly relieved that this was the entire purpose of the summons. Elena kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her heart still hammering, waiting for the moment to pass so she could escape back to the safety of the kitchen. But as the group began to disperse, Damien's voice cut through the room again. "Elena." Every head turned. Elena froze, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room settle on her at once, sharp with confusion and suspicion. "Yes, sir," she managed, forcing herself to look up. "A word, if you do not mind," he said, his tone giving nothing away. Priscilla's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, ushering the other servants out of the room with visible reluctance, leaving Elena alone with the king. Once the door closed, Damien's formal posture eased slightly, and something almost like amusement touched the corner of his mouth. You did not tell me last night who I was speaking with. You did not tell me who you were, either, Elena replied, before she could stop herself, then immediately winced at her own boldness. I am sorry. That was disrespectful. It was honest, Damien said. I have grown quite tired of people who only speak to me with careful, practiced words. Last night was the first real conversation I have had in longer than I can remember. Elena did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing, watching him carefully, waiting to understand what he wanted from her. I understand. You were told to remain hidden during my visit, Damien said, his gaze steady on her face. May I ask why? Elena's throat tightened. She could lie, offer some vague excuse about kitchen duties, but something about his direct gaze made deception feel impossible. Because I am not considered presentable, she said quietly. I cannot fully shift into my wolf form. The pack considers it a weakness and an embarrassment, especially in front of someone as important as yourself. She expected pity, or worse, confirmation that her pack was right to hide her away. Instead, Damien's expression sharpened with something closer to anger, though it was clear the anger was not directed at her. That is not a weakness, he said firmly. That is simply a difference. There is nothing broken about you, Elena. Her eyes stung unexpectedly, and she blinked quickly, unwilling to let him see how deeply his words had affected her. No one, not even her own father, had ever spoken to her that way. You should not have to hide, Damien continued. Not here, not anywhere. It is not that simple, Elena said softly. This is my home. My family is here. I cannot simply ignore the way things are. Damien studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful and quiet passing behind his eyes. No, he agreed finally. Perhaps not yet. Before Elena could ask what he meant by that, a sharp knock interrupted them, and one of Damien's guards entered, informing him that the pack elders were requesting his presence for the midday meeting. Damien's expression shifted back into its formal, controlled mask, though his eyes lingered on Elena for one more moment, before he turned to leave. Thank you again, Elena, he said, for the honesty. He left the room, and Elena remained standing there for several long moments, her heart still racing, trying to understand what had just happened, and why it felt as though something significant had shifted, quietly and irreversibly, beneath the surface of her ordinary, hidden life. Word of the private meeting spread through the pack house faster than Elena could have anticipated. By the time she returned to the kitchen, whispers were already circulating, twisted and exaggerated with each retelling. Some claimed the king had summoned her to scold her for the earlier collision. Others suggested something far more scandalous, and Elena felt the weight of suspicious eyes following her every movement for the rest of the day. Her father found her that evening, his face carefully blank in a way that told Elena he was furious beneath the surface. What did the king want with you? He asked, his voice low and tight. Nothing important, Elena said carefully. He thanked the kitchen staff for the meal, that is all. That is not what I have heard, Callum said. I have heard he asked for you specifically, alone. Elena's stomach twisted. It was a brief conversation, father, nothing more. Callum studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight. You will stay far away from him for the remainder of his visit, he said finally. Do you understand? The elders are already suspicious. If they believe you are somehow interfering with the marriage negotiations, the consequences will fall on this entire family. Not just you. I did nothing wrong, Elena said, frustration finally breaking through her careful composure. I did not seek him out. He spoke to me first. It does not matter who spoke first, Callum snapped. It only matters how it looks. And right now, it looks like the weak, defective daughter is somehow drawing the king's attention away from the women this pack has spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Do you understand how dangerous that is for you? Elena said nothing, her throat too tight to form words. She understood perfectly well. She had understood her entire life that her worth in this pack had always been measured, weighed, and found lacking, and now, through no real fault of her own, she had become something far more dangerous than simply unworthy. She had become a distraction, a complication, a threat to the careful plans of wolves, far more powerful than herself. That night, unable to sleep, Elena slipped out to the training yard again, seeking the quiet solitude that had always been her only true refuge. She did not expect to find anyone else there, and she startled when a familiar voice spoke from the shadows near the tree line. "I did not mean to cause trouble for you," Damien said, stepping into the moonlight. Elena's heart leapt into her throat. "You should not be out here," she whispered urgently, glancing around to make sure no one had seen him approach. "If anyone finds you here, with me, it will only make things worse." "I know," he said, though he did not retreat. "I heard about the conversation with your father. I am sorry, Elena. That was not my intention." "It does not matter what your intention was," Elena said, exhaustion bleeding into her voice. "The pack has already decided what this means. I am the reason for it, whether that is fair or not." Damien was quiet for a moment, watching her, with an expression that seemed to carry genuine regret. "You deserve better than what this place has given you," he said finally. "I have known that since the moment we collided in that corridor." Elena laughed softly, though there was little humor in it. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Damien said. "I know you speak honestly, even when it costs you something. I know you have survived years of cruelty without losing whatever it is that makes you who you are." "That is not nothing, Elena. That is rare." Elena did not know how to respond to words like that, words no one had ever offered her before. She simply stood there, caught between the pull of something new and terrifying, and the old, familiar fear of hoping for anything at all. "You should return before someone notices you are gone," she said finally, softer this time. Damien nodded, though he lingered a moment longer, his gaze steady on her face. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I do not believe you are weak, Elena. I believe this pack has simply never deserved you." He disappeared back into the shadows before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the moonlit yard, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else entirely, something dangerously close to hope. She did not yet know that their quiet meetings, however careful and brief, had already been noticed by eyes far less forgiving than her own, eyes that were already planning exactly how to use this discovery against her. The sound of raised voices woke Elena before dawn. She sat up in bed, disoriented, listening to the sharp murmur of conversation rising through the floorboards from the meeting hall below. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the tension of the air itself. She dressed quickly and crept down the back stairwell, staying close to the shadows, until she reached a small alcove near the main hall, where she could hear the elders speaking without being seen. Her father's voice was among them, tight with barely controlled anger. "She has been seen with him twice now," Priscilla was saying. "Once in the corridor, and again last night in the training yard, alone, in the dark. Do you understand what this means if word reaches the other packs? They will say Crimson Moon offered its weakest, most damaged wolf to distract the king, while presenting our strongest women as serious candidates. We will become a laughingstock." "She did not seek him out," Callum said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The king approached her both times." "It does not matter who approached whom," snapped another elder, a stern older man named Alden. "What matters is the perception. And right now, the perception is that this pack cannot control its own household. The king's advisors have already begun asking questions about her, about why she was hidden from the initial presentations." Elena's blood ran cold. She pressed herself further into the shadows, straining to hear every word. "We cannot simply do nothing," Priscilla continued. "The king leaves in 3 days. If this continues, if he grows any further attached to her, it could unravel every alliance we have spent years building. We need to remove the problem entirely." "You are talking about banishment," Callum said, his voice suddenly sharp with alarm. "She is my daughter." "She is a liability," Priscilla corrected coldly. "A liability, wearing your family name, and threatening to undo everything this pack has worked toward. I am sorry, Callum, truly, but the elders have already discussed this. If she remains, and the king's interest continues to grow, we risk far more than embarrassment. We risk our entire standing among the 5 packs." Elena's heart pounded so loudly she feared they might hear it from behind the wall. She wanted to run, to escape before hearing anything more, but her legs refused to move, rooted in place by disbelief and dawning horror. "There must be another way," Callum said, though his protest sounded weaker now, worn down by the weight of the argument against him. "There is no other way that protects this pack," Alden said firmly. "The decision has been made. Tomorrow, before the king's farewell ceremony, Elena will be formally banished. It will be presented as a long overdue correction, A defective wolf, finally removed from the pack registry. No one will question it. Everyone already believes she should have been removed years ago. Elena could not listen to another word. She stumbled backward, away from the alcove, and fled up the stairwell to her room, where she sat on the edge of her bed, shaking, trying to process what she had just heard. Banished. Tomorrow. Before the ceremony. She had spent her entire life being told she was worthless, defective, a shame to her family name. She had endured it, quietly, because she had nowhere else to go, no other life to imagine for herself. But banishment meant something far more severe than quiet cruelty. It meant being stripped of her pack, her name, her protection, and cast out into a world that showed no mercy to wolves, without a pack to call their own. She thought of finding Damien, of telling him what she had overheard, but she quickly dismissed the idea. What could he do? He was leaving in 3 days regardless, bound by duty to return to his own kingdom and continue his search for a suitable mate among the daughters of allied packs. She was not part of those plans. She had never been meant to be part of those plans. Whatever strange connection had sparked between them in that dark corridor was, in the end, nothing more than a brief and fleeting distraction before he returned to the life he was always going to lead. She spent the rest of the day moving through her duties in a daze, watching the pack prepare for the farewell ceremony, with a growing sense of dread. Every glance from Priscilla felt like a countdown. Every whispered conversation between elders felt like confirmation of what was coming. That evening, as she carried a tray of tea to the guest quarters, she found Damien standing near the window of his room, staring out at the darkening forest with a troubled expression. "Elena," he said, turning as she entered. "Is something wrong? You look pale." She hesitated, torn between her earlier resolve to say nothing and the sudden overwhelming urge to tell someone, anyone, what she had learned. In the end, the weight of it proved too heavy to carry alone. "I overheard the elders this morning," she said quietly, setting the tray down with trembling hands. "They are planning to banish me. Tomorrow. Before your farewell ceremony." Damien's expression darkened instantly. "Banish you? For what reason?" "For being seen with you," Elena said. "They believe I am jeopardizing the pack's alliance negotiations. They believe removing me will protect their standing among the other packs." "That is absurd," Damien said, anger sharpening his voice. "I will speak with the elders myself. I will make it clear that—" "No," Elena interrupted quickly. "Please, do not intervene. If you speak on my behalf, it will only confirm their suspicions. It will make things worse, not better." Damien studied her, his jaw tight with restrained frustration. "I cannot simply stand by and allow this to happen, Elena. You have no authority within Crimson Moon's internal matters," Elena said softly. "Even as king, banishment decisions belonging to individual packs are not something you can override without cause. And there is no cause here, not one they would recognize. I am simply an inconvenience to them, and they intend to remove that inconvenience." Damien was silent for a long moment, his expression torn between fury and helplessness, an unfamiliar combination for a man used to having absolute authority over nearly everything around him. "Then let me help you," he said finally. "Let me offer you protection, a place within my own territory, away from all of this." Elena's breath caught. The offer was tempting, more tempting than she wanted to admit, but something inside her rebelled against the idea of running toward him simply because she had nowhere else to turn. "I do not want to be someone you rescue out of guilt," she said quietly. "I do not want to become another complication for you to manage, another political problem disguised as kindness." "That is not what this is," Damien said, stepping closer. "Elena, I have spent 6 years surrounded by wolves who see me only as a title, a source of power to be courted or feared. You are the first person who has looked at me and seen simply a man, flawed and uncertain, rather than a crown. I do not offer this out of guilt. I offer it because I cannot imagine allowing something so unjust to happen to you when I have the power to prevent it." Elena's eyes stung, and she looked away, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. "Even if that is true," she said softly, "I cannot simply run to you the moment things become difficult. That is not the kind of person I want to be." "Then what will you do?" Damien asked, his voice gentle now. Elena did not have an answer. She stood there in silence, staring out at the darkening forest beyond the window, feeling the weight of an impossible choice pressing down upon her from every direction. I do not know, she admitted finally. But whatever happens tomorrow, I will not beg them to let me stay. I will not give them the satisfaction of watching me plead for a place I have never truly been welcomed into. Damien's expression softened with something like admiration. Then whatever happens, he said quietly, know that it does not define your worth. Nothing about you is defective, Elena. Nothing about you is weak. If they cannot see that, it is their failure, not yours. Elena left the guest quarters shortly after, her heart heavy, but strangely steadier than before, as though his words had settled something within her that had been shaking loose for years. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something other than shame settling into the space where fear had always lived. She would face whatever came next with her head held high, whatever the cost. The morning of the farewell ceremony arrived with a gray, heavy sky, as though even the weather sensed what was coming. Elena dressed in silence, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. She had decided, somewhere in the sleepless hours of the night, that she would not cry, would not beg, and would not give the elders the satisfaction of watching her break. The entire pack gathered in the main courtyard before the ceremony was set to begin, and Elena felt the weight of every stare as she took her place near the back of the crowd. Whispers followed her through the gathering, sharp and merciless, though she kept her chin lifted and her eyes forward. Her father found her briefly, before the elders arrived, his face drawn with an exhaustion that suggested he had not slept either. Elena, he said quietly, I tried to argue against this. You must believe that. I believe you tried, Elena said, and she meant it, though the words did little to ease the ache in her chest. But you did not stop it, father. In the end, that is what matters. Callum's jaw tightened, guilt flickering across his features, but he said nothing further, retreating back into the crowd as the elders began to emerge from the main hall, led by Priscilla and Alden, their expressions carefully arranged into solemn authority. Damien arrived shortly after, flanked by his guards, his expression unreadable as he took his place at the front of the courtyard. His eyes found Elena immediately, and for a brief moment, something passed between them, silent and heavy with everything neither of them could say aloud. Priscilla stepped forward, raising her voice so it carried across the entire gathered crowd. Before we conclude the king's visit with proper celebration, she announced, there is a matter of pack business that must be addressed. Elena felt her stomach drop as every eye in the courtyard turned toward her. For years, this pack has carried a wolf, incapable of completing the most basic transformation expected of every member of Crimson Moon. Priscilla continued, her voice cold and clinical. Elena, daughter of Callum, has failed repeatedly to demonstrate the strength and capability required of pack membership. After careful consideration, the elders have decided that her continued presence undermines the integrity and reputation of this pack. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, though none of them sounded surprised. Elena kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look down, refusing to let the tears burning behind her eyes fall. Effective immediately, Priscilla continued, Elena is stripped of her pack name, her family ties, and all protections afforded to members of Crimson Moon. She is to leave these lands before nightfall, and is forbidden from returning under any circumstances. The words landed like physical blows, each one stealing a little more air from Elena's lungs, but she remained standing, her spine straight, refusing to give the gathered crowd the reaction they seemed to be waiting for. She glanced toward Damien, and what she saw in his expression nearly broke her composure entirely. Fury, barely restrained, burned behind his eyes, his hands clenched at his sides as though physically restraining himself from intervening. But he said nothing, honoring the promise she had asked of him the night before, though the cost of that silence was written plainly across his face. Does the one being banished have anything to say? Alden asked, his tone suggesting he expected nothing more than tears or pleading. Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Only this, she said, loud enough for the entire courtyard to hear. I have spent my entire life believing the things this pack told me about myself, that I was weak, that I was broken, that I did not deserve a place among wolves who could shift fully, who could hunt and fight and prove themselves the way I never could. I believed it because I had no reason not to. Every single day, this pack reminded me of my failures, and I carried that shame quietly, because I did not know there was any other way to carry it. She paused, drawing in a steady breath. feeling something shift inside her, a quiet strength she had never fully recognized in herself before this moment. "But I do not believe it anymore," she continued. "Whatever is wrong with me, whatever makes me different from the rest of you, it is not weakness, it is simply different. And if this pack cannot see the difference between those two things, then perhaps I am better off away from it." Silence fell over the courtyard, heavy and stunned. No one had expected defiance, least of all from the girl they had spent years grinding down into quiet submission. Priscilla's expression flickered with something like anger at being denied the reaction she had wanted, but she recovered quickly, gesturing toward the gates. "Then you understand your situation clearly," she said coldly. "Gather your belongings. You have until nightfall." Elena turned without another word, walking back toward the small room above the kitchen that had been her home for 21 years, feeling the stares of the entire pack following her every step of the way. She packed quickly, her hands trembling now that she was finally alone, the composure she had maintained in the courtyard beginning to crack under the weight of what had just happened. She had nothing of value to bring with her, only a few changes of clothing, a small knife her mother had left behind, and the quiet, aching knowledge that everything she had ever known was about to disappear behind her. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Damien standing there, his expression torn between anger and grief. "I could not stop them," he said quietly. "I am sorry, Elena. I should have done something, regardless of what you asked of me." "You did exactly what I asked," Elena said. "Do not apologize for honoring that." "Let me help you," Damien said again, more urgently this time. "Come with me. I can offer you protection, a place within my own territory, far from here." Elena hesitated, the offer more tempting now than it had been the night before, now that the reality of banishment loomed so close and so terrifying. But something inside her still resisted, a stubborn thread of pride that refused to let her run toward safety, simply because she had nowhere else to turn. "I need to do this on my own first," she said finally. "I need to know I can survive this, without leaning on anyone else to save me. If I come to you now, running straight from banishment into your protection, I will never know if I could have stood on my own. And I need to know that, Damien, for myself." Damien studied her for a long moment, clear frustration warring with something that looked almost like respect. "Then at least let me give you this," he said, pressing a small leather pouch into her hands. "Supplies, and enough resources to survive until you find your footing. Please, Elena, allow me that much." Elena accepted the pouch, her throat tight with gratitude she could not fully express. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is not goodbye," Damien said firmly. "I will find you again, Elena. Wherever you go, however long it takes. This is not the end of whatever this is between us." Elena did not trust herself to respond, afraid that if she spoke another word, her carefully maintained composure would shatter completely. She simply nodded, gathering the last of her belongings, and turned to make her way toward the front gates, as the sky above began to darken with the approaching evening. The walk to the gates felt endless, every step accompanied by the weight of silent stares from the pack she had grown up among. Wolves who had never once made her feel welcome, yet whose rejection still cut deeper than she had expected. Her father stood near the gates as she approached, his expression a mixture of grief and helplessness that did nothing to ease the ache in her chest. "I am sorry, Elena," he said quietly. "I should have fought harder for you." "Goodbye, father," Elena said simply, unwilling to offer forgiveness she did not yet feel, though she understood, somewhere beneath the pain, that he had never been strong enough to stand against the pack that had shaped them both. She passed through the gates without looking back, stepping into the darkening forest beyond, the weight of her isolation settling over her like a physical presence. Behind her, the pack house glowed with warm light and distant celebration, the farewell ceremony continuing as though nothing significant had happened at all. Ahead of her lay only darkness, uncertainty, and the terrifying, exhilarating knowledge that for the first time in her entire life, she belonged to no one but herself. She walked forward into the trees, refusing to look back, refusing to let herself imagine what might have been different, and focused instead on placing one foot in front of the other, carrying herself toward whatever waited for her in the unknown world, beyond the only home she had ever known. Damien remained at Crimson Moon for 2 more days, fulfilling the obligations of his visit, with a cold, mechanical politeness that his advisors noticed immediately, though none dared question him about it directly. He smiled when required, spoke when expected, and gave every appearance of a king calmly completing a diplomatic visit. But beneath the surface, his mind remained fixed entirely on the woman who had walked out through those gates 2 nights before, alone and unprotected, into a world that showed no mercy to wolves without pack ties. On the morning of his departure, as his convoy prepared to leave Crimson Moon territory, his closest advisor, a steady and perceptive man named Nathaniel, approached him with visible concern. "You have been distracted these past 2 days," Nathaniel said carefully. "Ever since the banishment ceremony. May I ask what troubles you?" Damien considered deflecting the question, as he had done countless times before with matters he preferred to keep private, but something about the weight of the past several days made honesty feel necessary, even overdue. "The woman they banished," he said finally. "Elena. I care for her, Nathaniel. More than I have cared for anyone in longer than I can remember." Nathaniel's eyebrows rose slightly, though he kept his expression carefully neutral. "The kitchen servant? The one unable to fully shift?" "Yes," Damien said, his tone daring his advisor to comment further on that particular detail. "I see," Nathaniel said carefully. "And what do you intend to do about this?" "I intend to find her," Damien said firmly. "And I intend to bring her back to my territory, where she will be safe, and where I can finally determine whether what I feel for her is as significant as I believe it to be." Nathaniel hesitated, clearly choosing his next words with great care. "You understand the political complications this could create. The other packs have spent years positioning their daughters as potential candidates for your mate. Choosing a banished woman from Crimson Moon, one openly labeled as defective by her own former pack, could create significant unrest among your allies." "I am aware of the complications," Damien said, his voice hardening, "but I did not become king to spend my life making choices based entirely on the comfort of nobles who have never once had to fight for anything themselves. I make my own decisions, Nathaniel. This will be no different." Nathaniel studied him for a long moment, before finally nodding, recognizing the futility of further argument. "Then I will assist however I can," he said. "Where do you intend to begin searching?" Damien's expression grew troubled. "That is the difficulty," he admitted. "She refused my offer of protection when she left. She wanted to prove to herself that she could survive on her own first, before accepting any help from me. I do not know where she went, or how far she has traveled since then." "Then we will need trackers," Nathaniel said practically. "And patience. The forests surrounding Crimson Moon territory stretch for many miles in every direction. Much of it dangerous. Unclaimed land, where rogue wolves without pack affiliation often gather. If she has been traveling alone for 2 days already, she could be facing threats far more immediate than simple survival." The words settled heavily in Damien's chest, sharpening his resolve into something fierce and unyielding. "Then we begin immediately," he said. "I will not wait a single day longer than necessary." The search began that same afternoon, with Damien's most skilled trackers fanning out across the forest, in careful, methodical patterns, searching for any sign of Elena's passage through the wilderness. Damien insisted on joining the search personally, despite Nathaniel's gentle suggestions that a king's presence in the field was unusual and potentially risky. "I do not care about risk," Damien said firmly, mounting his horse alongside the search party. "I care about finding her before something happens that cannot be undone." They searched for the remainder of that day and into the next, following faint traces of disturbed underbrush and old, half-covered footprints that suggested Elena's path through the dense forest. Damien's frustration grew with each passing hour, the fear that something might have already happened to her, gnawing steadily at the edges of his composure. On the second day of searching, one of the trackers returned with troubling news. "We found signs of a struggle near the eastern ridge," the tracker reported. "Torn fabric, disturbed ground, and what appears to be blood, though not enough to suggest serious harm. It is difficult to say for certain whose blood it was, or what happened there." Damien's blood ran cold at the report, his mind immediately conjuring the worst possible outcomes. "Take me there," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Immediately." The eastern ridge, when they arrived, told a story of chaos and struggle, though thankfully, no body remained to confirm the worst of Damien's fears. Torn fabric, matching the description of clothing Elena had been wearing when she left Crimson Moon, lay scattered near a cluster of disturbed earth. alongside faint traces of blood that had already begun to dry into the soil. "Rogue wolves," Nathaniel said grimly, examining the scene with practiced eyes. "Several of them, judging by the tracks. It appears there was a confrontation here, though the outcome remains unclear." "Which direction did she go?" Damien demanded, scanning the surrounding forest with desperate intensity. The trackers spent nearly an hour examining the scene, before finally identifying a faint trail leading further east, deeper into unclaimed territory, known for its dangerous, lawless reputation. Damien did not hesitate, pushing the search party forward with renewed urgency, refusing to consider the possibility that they might be following a trail toward tragedy rather than rescue. As they traveled deeper into the unclaimed forest, the landscape grew wilder and more treacherous, dense undergrowth giving way to jagged rock formations and steep ravines that made tracking increasingly difficult. Damien's fear grew with each passing mile, though he refused to voice it aloud, channeling every ounce of his anxiety into the relentless determination to find her. By the third day, the search party had grown weary, their supplies dwindling, and several of Damien's advisors began quietly suggesting that perhaps it was time to consider returning to gather additional resources before continuing further into such dangerous territory. Damien refused to hear any of it. "We do not stop," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Not until we find her." It was late in the afternoon of the third day, when one of the trackers suddenly called out, his voice sharp with urgency, drawing the entire search party's attention toward a distant clearing, where movement had been spotted through the trees. Damien's heart pounded as he urged his horse forward, following the tracker's lead toward the clearing, uncertain whether he was about to find salvation or devastation waiting for him among the trees. What greeted him there, as he broke through the final line of underbrush into the clearing beyond, was something he could never have possibly anticipated, something that would forever change his understanding of exactly who Elena truly was, and exactly what she was capable of when pushed to her absolute limits. 3 days earlier, Elena had walked away from Crimson Moon with nothing but a small bag of supplies and a determination not to look back. The forest around her had felt endless, the darkness pressing in from every direction, but she had kept moving, one careful step after another, refusing to let fear paralyze her, before she had even begun to survive on her own. The first night had been the hardest. She had found a small hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree and curled herself into it, listening to every distant sound with her heart hammering against her ribs. Without pack protection, without the safety of numbers, every rustle in the darkness became a potential threat. Every distant howl, a reminder of exactly how vulnerable she truly was. By the second day, hunger had begun to gnaw at her, and she had forced herself to remember the small amount of foraging knowledge she had picked up over the years. Working in the kitchen gardens back home, she found berries, carefully checking them against what she remembered of safe and dangerous varieties, and a small stream where she could refill her water skin, grateful for the small mercies the forest offered, even as it threatened her survival at every turn. It was on the morning of the third day that everything changed. Elena had been moving through a narrow ravine, searching for a way around a particularly steep rock formation, when she heard the unmistakable sound of movement ahead, too heavy and deliberate to be simple wildlife. She froze, pressing herself against the rock wall, straining to identify the source of the sound. 3 wolves emerged from the tree line ahead, their postures immediately signaling danger, their eyes carrying the wild, unpredictable look of rogues without pack affiliation. Elena's blood ran cold. Rogue wolves were known for their brutality, cast out from their own packs for crimes too severe for simple banishment, or born into a life without pack structure entirely, surviving through whatever means necessary. "Well, look what wandered into our territory," the largest of the 3 said, his voice carrying a mocking edge that made Elena's skin crawl. "A lone wolf, no pack scent protecting her. That makes you fair game, little one." Elena's mind raced, searching desperately for options. She had no pack to call for help, no weapon beyond the small knife her mother had left her, and against 3 rogue wolves, that knife would offer little real protection. She began backing away slowly, trying to buy herself time to think, but the wolves advanced steadily, clearly enjoying the fear they saw radiating from her. "There is nowhere to run," the second wolf said, circling around to block her path of retreat. "You should have stayed within your pack's borders, where at least someone might have come looking for you." Elena's hand tightened around the small knife hidden in her sleeve, though she knew, even as she gripped it, that it would offer little real defense against three determined attackers. She thought, desperately, of Damien's words from their final conversation, about strength that had nothing to do with fully shifting, about worth that was not measured by conventional standards. The largest wolf lunged toward her without warning, and Elena reacted on pure instinct, throwing herself sideways to avoid his grasp, her body moving with a speed and precision she had never known she possessed. She scrambled backward, drawing her knife, her heart pounding with a desperate combination of fear and fierce determination. "She has some fight in her," the second wolf said, sounding almost amused as he advanced from the opposite direction. "Good, makes it more interesting." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, an old, familiar pressure building beneath her skin, the same sensation she had felt countless times before during her failed attempts to shift, except this time, it felt different, stronger, fueled by something more powerful than simple willpower. Fear for her life, she realized. Genuine, desperate necessity, in a way that quiet nighttime attempts in the training yard had never demanded of her. As the largest wolf lunged again, Elena felt her body respond, in a way it never had before. Her vision sharpened suddenly, colors and shapes becoming impossibly clear, even in the dim, filtered light of the ravine. Her muscles coiled with unexpected strength, and when she moved to avoid his attack, her body twisted with a speed that felt almost unnatural, dodging his grasp entirely, before darting toward a narrow gap between two rock formations that a wolf his size could never fit through. "What is she doing?" the third wolf demanded, confusion cutting through his earlier confidence. Elena did not fully understand it herself, but something had finally unlocked inside her, a version of her wolf nature that had never matched the traditional shapes and strengths of Crimson Moon's other wolves, but that carried its own unique power nonetheless. She moved with quickness rather than brute force, agility rather than raw strength, ducking and weaving through the narrow spaces of the ravine in ways that left her larger, heavier attackers struggling to keep pace. The second wolf, growing frustrated, attempted to corner her against the rock wall, but Elena spotted the movement early, her enhanced senses picking up the shift in his stance before he had even fully committed to the attack. She darted beneath his outstretched arm, using her knife with quick, precise movements that left him staggering backward, more shocked than seriously wounded. "This is impossible," the largest wolf snarled, clearly unaccustomed to a supposedly weak, defenseless target, proving so difficult to subdue. "Enough playing, finish this." All three wolves converged on her at once, and Elena felt a surge of pure adrenaline flood through her body, sharpening every sense to its absolute limit. She could see every subtle shift in their muscles, predict every movement half a second before it happened, her body responding with an instinctive grace that felt, for the first time in her entire life, completely natural rather than forced. She ducked beneath the first wolf's swipe, twisted away from the second's lunge, and used the momentum of her movement to drive her shoulder into the third wolf's side, sending him stumbling into the rock wall with enough force to daze him temporarily. It was not brute strength that carried her through the fight, but something else entirely, a combination of speed, precision, and an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings that left her attackers increasingly bewildered and off balance. The confrontation stretched on, brutal and exhausting, Elena's body straining under the demands of sustained combat against three larger opponents. She sustained several injuries along the way, shallow cuts along her forearm, and a heavy bruise blooming across her ribs, where one of the wolves had managed to land a solid strike, but she refused to yield, drawing on reserves of strength and determination she had never known she possessed. Eventually, recognizing that their supposedly easy target had proven far more capable than anticipated, and clearly wary of sustaining further injuries themselves, the three rogue wolves retreated back into the tree line, snarling threats about returning with reinforcements, though Elena suspected their wounded pride played as large a role in their retreat as any genuine tactical consideration. She collapsed against the rock wall once they had disappeared, her entire body shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and exertion, staring down at her own hands in disbelief. Something had changed within her during that fight, something fundamental that she did not yet fully understand, but that felt undeniably, powerfully real. She had survived, not through the traditional strength the pack had always demanded of her, but through something uniquely her own, a combination of speed and instinct that had emerged only when genuinely tested, when survival itself had demanded nothing less than her full potential. For the first time in her entire life, Elena did not feel weak. She felt, for the first time, truly and completely capable, in a way that had nothing to do with matching anyone else's definition of strength, and everything to do with finally discovering her own. She spent the remainder of that day resting in a small cave she discovered further along the ravine, tending to her wounds as best she could, and processing everything that had just happened. She did not yet know that her battle with the rogue wolves had left enough evidence behind, torn fabric and traces of blood scattered across the ravine, to draw the attention of trackers following her trail from several miles behind. She did not yet know that Damien Voss himself was closing the distance between them with every passing hour, driven by a desperate determination to find her, before anything worse could happen. And she certainly did not yet know that when he finally found her, he would witness firsthand exactly what she was truly capable of, a display of strength and resilience that would confirm, beyond any doubt, everything he had already come to believe about her worth. The clearing Damien rode into on the third day of searching held no sign of the rogue confrontation from the day before, only quiet forest and the fading light of late afternoon. But as the search party spread out to investigate, a tracker's sharp call drew everyone's attention toward a narrow ravine cutting through the rocks just beyond the clearing. Damien dismounted immediately, following the tracker toward the ravine, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. When he reached the entrance and looked down into the narrow passage below, what he saw stopped him completely in his tracks. Elena stood at the center of the ravine, her clothing torn and stained with dried blood, facing down a fourth rogue wolf who had apparently returned, alone this time, seeking to finish what his companions had abandoned the day before. Her stance was low and coiled, every muscle in her body radiating a fierce, controlled readiness that bore no resemblance to the quiet, hidden servant Damien had first encountered in that dark corridor back at Crimson Moon. As Damien watched, frozen with a strange combination of terror and awe, the rogue wolf lunged toward her, and Elena moved with a speed that seemed almost impossible, ducking beneath his outstretched claws and driving her elbow into his exposed side, with enough force to send him stumbling backward, snarling in pain and frustration. She did not hesitate, following the momentum of her strike with a quick, precise movement that Damien recognized, even from a distance, as calculated rather than desperate. This was not simply a woman fighting for her life through blind panic. This was someone who had discovered, through necessity, a version of herself capable of genuine strength and skill. The rogue wolf recovered quickly, lunging again with renewed aggression, but Elena anticipated the movement, twisting away at the last possible moment and using her smaller size and superior agility to slip behind him, driving her knee into the back of his leg hard enough to buckle his stance. He crashed to the ground, and before he could recover, Elena pressed her knife against his throat, her chest heaving with exertion, but her hand perfectly steady. "Leave," she said, her voice carrying a quiet, fierce authority that Damien had never heard from her before, "and do not return." The rogue wolf, recognizing the futility of continued aggression, scrambled to his feet and fled into the trees, disappearing from sight within moments. Elena remained standing there for a long moment afterward, breathing heavily, before her shoulders finally sagged with obvious exhaustion. "Elena," Damien called out, unable to contain himself any longer, half sliding down the rocky slope into the ravine to reach her. She turned at the sound of his voice, her expression shifting rapidly from wary alertness to stunned disbelief. "Damien, what are you doing here?" "Looking for you," he said, closing the distance between them quickly, his eyes scanning her injuries with obvious concern. "We found signs of a struggle 2 days ago, and I feared the worst. Are you badly hurt?" "I will survive," Elena said, though the exhaustion in her voice suggested the past few days had taken a significant toll. "You should not have come looking for me. I told you I needed to prove I could survive on my own." "And you have," Damien said, his voice thick with something between admiration and lingering fear. "I just watched you defeat a rogue wolf single-handedly, Elena. Whatever doubts anyone ever had about your strength, I hope you understand now, beyond any question, how wrong they were." Elena looked down at her own hands, still trembling slightly from adrenaline, processing everything that had happened over the past several days. "Something changed," she said slowly. During the first attack, 3 days ago. I do not fully understand it, but something inside me finally responded, in a way it never had before. Not the way other wolves shift, but something different, faster, more precise. Show me, Damien said gently. Elena hesitated, uncertain whether she could deliberately summon whatever had emerged during her fight for survival, but as she closed her eyes and reached inward, focusing on the memory of that fierce, desperate strength, she felt her body respond in ways it never had, during her countless failed attempts back at Crimson Moon. Her senses sharpened, her muscles coiled with newfound readiness, and though she did not fully transform into a traditional wolf shape, something shifted within her. A partial transformation, unlike anything either of them had witnessed before, combining human awareness with heightened wolf instincts and abilities. Damien watched, genuinely stunned, as understanding dawned across his features. "You are not defective," he said slowly. "You are simply different from what Crimson Moon expected. Your abilities never matched the traditional mold, because they were never meant to. This is something else entirely, Elena. Something unique." Elena felt tears finally breaking through the composure she had maintained throughout her ordeal. The weight of 21 years of shame and rejection, colliding with this sudden, overwhelming validation. "Everyone told me I was broken," she said, her voice cracking. "For my entire life." "They were wrong," Damien said firmly, closing the remaining distance between them, and gently taking her hands in his own. "Profoundly, unforgivably wrong." The rest of the search party arrived at the ravine shortly after, Nathaniel among them, his expression carefully composed, despite the obvious surprise at witnessing Elena's unique abilities firsthand. Medical attention was quickly arranged for Elena's injuries, and as the search party began preparing camp for the evening, Damien remained close by her side, unwilling to let her out of his sight again after the terror of the past 3 days. "I owe you an apology," Damien said quietly, once Elena's wounds had been properly treated, and she sat wrapped in a warm blanket near the campfire. "For deceiving you about my identity during our first meetings. I should have told you immediately who I truly was." "You were simply a stranger, seeking an honest conversation," Elena said, managing a tired smile. "I understand why you wanted that, even without the weight of your title attached to it." "Even so," Damien said, "I should have been honest from the beginning." "You were honest about everything that mattered," Elena said softly. "That is enough for me." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long while, watching the fire crackle against the darkening forest, the weight of everything that had happened over the past several days, finally beginning to settle between them. "What happens now?" Elena asked eventually, breaking the silence. Damien considered the question carefully before answering. "That depends entirely on what you want, Elena. I meant what I said before you left Crimson Moon. I want you to come with me, to my territory, where you will be safe and valued for exactly who you are, but I will not force that choice upon you. You have spent your entire life having decisions made for you by people who never respected your voice in the matter. I refuse to become another version of that." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing the offer against everything she had discovered about herself over the past several days. She had proven, beyond any doubt, that she was capable of surviving on her own, of defending herself against genuine threats, of discovering strength within herself that no one, including herself, had ever believed existed. But survival alone had never been her true ambition. She had simply never allowed herself to dream of anything more, believing herself unworthy of any life beyond quiet endurance. "I want to come with you," she said finally, her voice steady and certain. "Not because I need saving, but because I choose to build something new, somewhere that might finally allow me to become whoever I am truly meant to be." Damien's expression softened with quiet relief and unmistakable joy. "Then that is exactly what we will build together," he said, "starting tomorrow, when we begin the journey back to my territory." Elena nodded, feeling something settle within her chest that felt remarkably like hope, a sensation so unfamiliar after years of quiet resignation that it took her several long moments to fully recognize it for what it was. For the first time in her entire life, she was choosing her own path forward, rather than simply enduring whatever path others had chosen for her. And as she watched the firelight dance across Damien's face, she allowed herself, finally, to believe that whatever waited for her ahead might prove far brighter than anything she had left behind. The journey to Damien's territory took nearly a week, traveling through varied landscapes that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Elena with each passing day. She had never traveled beyond the borders of Crimson Moon in her entire life, and the sight of Damien's capital, a sprawling stronghold nestled among tall mountains with towers rising toward the sky, left her momentarily speechless as they approached the final stretch of their journey. "This is where you rule?" she asked, staring up at the impressive fortifications surrounding the city. "This is where I have lived my entire life," Damien said, watching her reaction with quiet amusement. "It will take some time to feel like home, I imagine, but I hope, in time, that it will." As their convoy passed through the main gates, Elena felt the weight of countless curious stares following their arrival, whispers already beginning to circulate among the gathered crowd about the identity of the woman riding beside their king. She kept her chin lifted, remembering the lessons she had learned over the past week, refusing to let unfamiliar scrutiny shake the confidence she had fought so hard to discover within herself. Damien wasted no time addressing the situation directly. That very evening, he called together his full council of advisors and announced, without hesitation or apology, his intention to claim Elena as his chosen mate. The reaction among his council was immediate and divided. Several advisors, including Nathaniel, offered cautious support, recognizing the genuine connection between their king and this newcomer, even if her background differed significantly from the polished, politically connected candidates they had spent years cultivating. Others reacted with open skepticism, their concerns echoing many of the same prejudices Elena had faced her entire life. "With respect, my king," said one older advisor, a stern woman named Constance, "the other packs have spent considerable resources positioning their daughters as suitable candidates for exactly this role. Choosing a woman banished from her own pack for an inability to properly shift will raise serious questions about your judgment, and may weaken important alliances you have spent years cultivating." "I understand the political concerns," Damien said, his voice calm but firm. "But my choice is made. Elena possesses strength and capability that rival any wolf I have ever encountered. Strength that manifests differently than traditional expectations, but that is no less genuine or valuable. Those who cannot see that clearly are welcome to voice their concerns, but my decision remains unchanged." The council meeting ended without full consensus, though Damien's authority as king left little room for further argument. Elena, who had listened to the entire exchange from a private antechamber at Damien's insistence, emerged once the council had dispersed, her expression troubled. "They are right to worry," she said quietly. "This could genuinely damage your standing among the other packs." "Then we will address those concerns together," Damien said. "I do not expect you to simply hide away, while others determine your worth from a distance. If anyone doubts your capability, they will have the opportunity to see it themselves, in time." Word of Damien's announcement spread quickly beyond his own territory, reaching the other allied packs within days. The reaction, as anticipated, proved largely negative. Several pack leaders sent formal letters expressing concern, questioning whether a king's choice of mate reflected poorly on his judgment and strength as a ruler. Rumors began circulating, some suggesting Elena had somehow manipulated or enchanted the king, others simply repeating the same tired accusations of weakness and defectiveness that had followed her throughout her entire life at Crimson Moon. Elena bore the scrutiny with the same quiet determination that had carried her through her banishment and the dangerous days that followed, though the constant judgment weighed on her more heavily than she ever admitted aloud. She spent her days learning the customs and expectations of Damien's court, working diligently alongside Nathaniel, who proved a patient and thoughtful teacher, despite his initial reservations about the political complications her presence created. "You do not need to prove yourself to everyone," Nathaniel told her one afternoon, as they reviewed matters of court etiquette together. "Damien's confidence in you is genuine, and that alone carries significant weight." "I know," Elena said, "but I do not want to simply be tolerated because of his authority. I want to earn genuine respect, on my own merits." "Then you will," Nathaniel said simply. "Give it time." The true test of that patience arrived nearly 3 weeks after Elena's arrival, when word reached the capital that a rival pack leader, a proud and ambitious man named Idrik, who ruled over the northern territories, intended to challenge Damien's authority directly, viewing his controversial choice of mate as a sign of weakness ripe for exploitation. "Edric has always sought greater influence among the 5 packs," Nathaniel explained grimly, as the council gathered to discuss the growing threat. He has been searching for an opportunity to challenge Damien's leadership for years. Your arrival, and the resulting political turmoil, has given him exactly the excuse he needed. What does this challenge involve? Elena asked, her stomach tightening with dawning apprehension. Edric has mobilized forces along the northern border, Damien explained, his expression grim. He intends to test our strength directly, believing that internal division over my choice of mate has weakened our ability to respond effectively. If we fail to demonstrate sufficient strength and unity, other packs may follow his lead, believing the same weakness applies throughout our entire territory. Elena felt the familiar weight of old fears returning, the terrifying possibility that her presence had genuinely become the catalyst for exactly the kind of disaster Constance and the other skeptical advisors had warned against. Perhaps I should leave, she said quietly. If my presence here is truly this, dangerous to your rule, perhaps. No, Damien interrupted firmly, taking her hands in his own. This is not your failure to bear, Elena. Edric would have found some excuse to challenge my authority eventually, regardless of my choice in a mate. This is simply the excuse he has chosen to use. Running from this problem would not solve it. It would only confirm exactly the narrative he wishes to spread. Elena studied him for a long moment, recognizing the truth in his words even as fear continued to churn within her chest. Then let me help, she said finally. Whatever this conflict requires, let me be part of the solution rather than hiding away from it. Damien's expression shifted with something between concern and reluctant admiration. This will not be simple negotiation, Elena. Edric's forces are prepared for genuine confrontation, and I cannot guarantee your safety in such circumstances. I did not ask for guarantees, Elena said. I asked to help protect something worth protecting. Whatever unique strength I discovered in that ravine, whatever this connection is between us, I refuse to simply watch from the sidelines while you face this threat alone. The council debated the matter extensively over the following days, ultimately determining that a direct confrontation with Edric's forces would be necessary to demonstrate, beyond any doubt, that Damien's territory remained strong and unified, despite the political turmoil surrounding his controversial choice of mate. Elena insisted on being part of the response, and after considerable discussion, Damien reluctantly agreed, recognizing that her unique abilities might prove genuinely valuable in the confrontation ahead. As preparations began for the coming conflict, Elena found herself training alongside Damien's most skilled warriors, learning to refine and control the unique abilities that had first emerged during her desperate battle against the rogue wolves. Days blurred into intense, focused training sessions, each one revealing new dimensions of the strength she had discovered within herself. Strength built not on traditional brute force, but on speed, precision, and an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings that continued to astonish everyone who witnessed it. She did not yet know exactly how the coming confrontation with Edric's forces would unfold, or whether her presence would ultimately prove the solution, or the catastrophe so many still feared. But for the first time in her entire life, Elena felt genuinely prepared to face whatever challenge awaited her, armed not with the traditional strength Crimson Moon had always demanded, but with a uniquely her own combination of skill, determination, and the unshakable knowledge that she had already survived far worse than anything still to come. The morning of the confrontation arrived with a tense, electric energy settling over the entire capital. Edric's forces had advanced steadily over the preceding days, gathering along the northern border in numbers significant enough to make clear that this challenge was intended as genuine confrontation, rather than simple posturing. Damien assembled his own forces at dawn, addressing them with calm, steady authority, despite the obvious weight of the coming confrontation. Elena stood near the front of the gathered warriors, dressed in practical clothing suited for combat, rather than the formal gowns she had been offered since arriving at the capital, her expression focused and determined, despite the nervous energy coiling in her stomach. Edric believes our internal divisions have weakened us, Damien said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled forces. He believes that my choice of mate reflects poor judgment, and that this territory is ripe for challenge. Today we will demonstrate exactly how mistaken that belief truly is. The forces moved out shortly after, traveling toward the northern border, where Edric's army had already begun gathering in a wide, open valley, chosen deliberately for its strategic advantages. As Damien's forces arrived and took their positions along the ridge overlooking the valley, Elena felt her heart pounding, with a combination of fear and fierce determination, the weight of everything at stake settling heavily across her shoulders. Edric himself rode forward from his own assembled forces, a broad, imposing man, whose expression carried open contempt as his gaze settled on Elena standing beside Damien. "So this is the woman causing such division among your ranks," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the valley. "I confess, I expected someone more impressive, given the trouble she has apparently caused." "Edric," Damien said, his voice carrying calm, dangerous authority. "This confrontation need not happen. Withdraw your forces, and we can resolve our disagreements through proper diplomatic channels, as has always been our tradition among the 5 packs." "Diplomatic channels have already failed," Edric replied, his tone mocking. "You have chosen a defective, banished woman over the daughters of allied packs, who have spent years preparing for exactly this role. That choice reflects weakness, Damien, and weakness within leadership creates instability throughout the entire territory. I am simply addressing that instability directly, before it spreads further." "And if I prove that weakness does not exist here," Damien asked evenly, "will you withdraw your forces and abandon this challenge?" Edric considered the question for a long moment, clearly recognizing the opportunity Damien was offering. A direct confrontation would risk casualties and destruction on both sides, regardless of the eventual outcome. A more contained demonstration of strength might satisfy his stated concerns, while avoiding the costs of full-scale conflict. "Very well," Edric said finally. "Choose a champion to represent your territory's strength. If your champion proves victorious, I will withdraw my forces and abandon this challenge entirely. But if my own champion prevails, you will publicly acknowledge the weakness of your leadership and reconsider your choice of mate." Murmurs rippled through both assembled forces at the proposal, and Damien's advisors immediately began suggesting their most skilled warriors as potential champions to represent their territory's strength. But before any decision could be finalized, Elena stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the tense silence of the valley. "I will be your champion," she said. Shock rippled through both gathered forces, and Damien turned toward her, his expression torn between alarm and reluctant understanding. "Elena, this is not necessary. My warriors are prepared to—" "This is exactly what is necessary," Elena interrupted gently. "Edric's entire challenge rests on the belief that I represent weakness. If I prove otherwise, directly and undeniably, there will be no question left to answer. Let me do this, Damien. Let me prove, once and for all, that his assumptions about me are entirely wrong." Damien studied her for a long moment, clearly torn between his desire to protect her and his recognition of the truth in her words. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained tight with concern. "If this is truly what you choose," he said quietly. "It is," Elena said firmly. Edric's expression shifted from surprise to open amusement as he processed the unexpected proposal. "You intend to send the very woman I am challenging as your own champion?" he asked, incredulous. "This will be over quickly then." He gestured toward his own forces, and a massive, heavily muscled warrior stepped forward, his expression carrying the same dismissive confidence Elena had encountered countless times throughout her life at Crimson Moon. She recognized the look immediately, the assumption of easy victory based entirely on her appearance, rather than any genuine understanding of her capabilities. The two combatants moved to the center of the valley, as both assembled forces watched in tense silence. Elena drew a steady breath, closing her eyes briefly to center herself, reaching inward toward the unique strength she had discovered during her desperate battle in that mountain ravine weeks before. The warrior lunged first, confident in his significant size and strength advantage, but Elena moved exactly as she had trained, her body responding with the speed and precision that had first emerged during that fight for survival. She ducked beneath his outstretched arm, using his own momentum against him, and drove her elbow into his exposed ribs with enough force to steal the breath from his lungs. He recovered quickly, turning to face her with renewed aggression, clearly startled by her unexpected speed. He lunged again, and again Elena evaded, her movements economical and precise, conserving her energy while systematically identifying weaknesses in his defensive posture that she could exploit as the confrontation continued. The battle stretched on, the warrior's brute strength repeatedly failing to connect against Elena's superior agility and tactical awareness. She sustained several minor injuries throughout the exchange, but nothing that slowed her determination, drawing on reserves of strength that continued to surprise even herself with their depth and resilience. Eventually, Recognizing that his significant size advantage offered little benefit against an opponent who refused to engage him directly, the warrior attempted a desperate, all-or-nothing charge, hoping to simply overwhelm her through sheer momentum. Elena anticipated the movement, waiting until the last possible instant before sidestepping entirely, using his own forward momentum to send him crashing into the ground, with a force that left him dazed and struggling to rise. She stood over him, breathing heavily but steady, her knife resting lightly against his throat, as silence fell across the entire valley. "Yield," she said simply. The warrior, recognizing the futility of continued resistance, finally nodded, and Elena stepped back, allowing him to rise unsteadily to his feet, his earlier confidence entirely shattered by the unexpected outcome of their confrontation. Silence stretched across the valley for a long moment before Edric finally spoke, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and grudging acknowledgement. "It appears I was mistaken," he said finally. "About several things, it seems." "Then you will honor our agreement," Damien said, stepping forward to stand beside Elena, his pride evident in every line of his posture. "Withdraw your forces, Edric, and abandon this challenge entirely." Edric studied Elena for a long moment, something shifting behind his earlier contempt into genuine, if reluctant, respect. "Very well," he said finally. "Consider the challenge withdrawn." He turned to address his own assembled forces, ordering their retreat, though his gaze lingered on Elena for a moment longer, before he finally turned to depart the valley entirely. As Edric's forces began their withdrawal, cheers rose from Damien's own warriors, the tension of the past several weeks, finally breaking into genuine celebration. Damien turned to Elena, his expression carrying a depth of pride and admiration that left her momentarily breathless. "You did not need my protection at all," he said softly. "You have proven, beyond any doubt, exactly what I always believed about you." Elena felt exhaustion finally settling over her, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade, but beneath that exhaustion lived something powerful and unshakable, a quiet certainty about her own worth that no amount of doubt or scrutiny could ever fully diminish again. "We proved it together," she said, taking his hand in her own. "Whatever comes next, we will face it the same way." As they turned to make their way back toward the capital, the assembled warriors falling into formation behind them, Elena understood, with absolute clarity, that whatever challenges still awaited her in this new life, she would face them, not as the weak, defective woman Crimson Moon had always insisted she was, but as someone who had discovered, through genuine trial and undeniable proof, exactly how much strength had always lived within her. News of Elena's victory in the Northern Valley spread quickly across the 5 packs, carried by warriors and travelers who had witnessed the confrontation firsthand and spoke of it with genuine astonishment. Within days, the narrative that had once painted Elena as a defective embarrassment had transformed entirely, replaced by stories of a woman whose unique strength had defended an entire territory against a challenge that could have devastated countless lives. Damien's council, including the previously skeptical Constance, gathered shortly after the confrontation to formally acknowledge what had become undeniably clear to everyone involved. "I owe you an apology," Constance said directly to Elena, her earlier reservations replaced by genuine respect. "I judged you based on assumptions that proved entirely unfounded. Your strength and your courage in stepping forward when it mattered most have earned my genuine admiration." "Thank you," Elena said simply, understanding the significance of such an admission from someone who had initially opposed her presence so firmly. As weeks passed, Elena settled more fully into her new life within Damien's territory, continuing to train and refine the unique abilities she had discovered, while also learning the responsibilities that would eventually accompany her role as Damien's chosen mate. She worked closely with Nathaniel on matters of governance and diplomacy, discovering within herself a genuine talent for strategic thinking that had never been given the opportunity to develop during her years confined to kitchen work at Crimson Moon. The formal ceremony marking Elena's official position as Damien's mate was scheduled for the following month, and preparations began throughout the capital with an energy and enthusiasm that stood in stark contrast to the skepticism that had greeted her arrival weeks before. Elena found herself, for the first time in her entire life, genuinely anticipated and celebrated, rather than hidden away or dismissed. News of the upcoming ceremony eventually reached Crimson Moon, carried by traveling merchants and diplomatic messengers who moved between the various pack territories. The pack that had once banished Elena as a shameful embarrassment now found itself facing an uncomfortable reality. The woman they had cast out as defective was set to become queen of the most powerful territory among all 5 packs. Elder Priscilla, upon learning the news, immediately convened an emergency meeting of Crimson Moon's leadership council. "We must send representatives to the ceremony," she argued, her earlier contempt for Elena now buried beneath calculating political consideration. "If we fail to acknowledge this development appropriately, we risk becoming isolated from the very alliance we once sought, through more conventional means." Callum, Elena's father, listened to the discussion with a complicated mixture of guilt and cautious hope. He had carried the weight of his failure to protect his daughter throughout every day since her banishment, and the news of her remarkable transformation offered a fragile possibility of reconciliation he had not dared to imagine. Ultimately, Crimson Moon's council decided to send a formal delegation to the ceremony, ostensibly to offer congratulations and re-establish diplomatic ties, though privately, many among their ranks hoped such a gesture might soften whatever resentment Elena still carried toward the pack that had cast her out so cruelly. When the delegation arrived at Damien's capital, several days before the scheduled ceremony, Elena felt a complicated tangle of emotions upon learning of their presence. Part of her wanted nothing to do with the pack that had shown her such consistent cruelty throughout her entire life. But another part of her, quieter and more contemplative, recognized an opportunity to finally close the chapter of her life that Crimson Moon represented, on her own terms rather than theirs. She agreed to a formal audience with the delegation, held in the grand receiving hall of Damien's palace, with Damien himself standing beside her throughout the entire exchange. Priscilla led the delegation, her earlier cruelty now carefully disguised behind practiced diplomatic courtesy. "We wish to offer our sincere congratulations," Priscilla began, her tone carefully measured, "on your upcoming position as queen. Crimson Moon takes great pride in having once been part of your journey, however humble those beginnings may have been." Elena studied the woman who had orchestrated her banishment with such cold efficiency, recognizing the careful political calculation behind every word being offered now. "Crimson Moon showed me nothing but cruelty and rejection throughout my entire life there," she said evenly, her voice carrying none of the anger she might once have felt, replaced instead by calm, unshakable clarity. "I do not believe the pack deserves credit for a journey it actively tried to prevent." Priscilla's composure flickered slightly, though she recovered quickly. "Regardless of past disagreements, surely there is value in re-establishing positive relations between our territories, for the benefit of both our peoples." "There may be value in that, eventually," Elena acknowledged, "but that value will not come from pretending the past did not happen exactly as it did. Crimson Moon banished me for being different, for failing to match expectations that were never fair to begin with. If genuine reconciliation is truly desired, it will require honest acknowledgement of that cruelty, not simply convenient amnesia now that circumstances have changed." The delegation shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for such direct confrontation from the woman they had once dismissed as too weak to offer any real challenge to their authority. Callum, standing quietly among the delegation, finally stepped forward, his expression carrying genuine, unguarded emotion. "Elena," he said, his voice thick with long overdue regret, "I failed you as a father. I allowed this pack's prejudices to override my responsibility to protect you, and I have carried that shame every single day since your banishment. I do not expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know, truly, how deeply I regret my failures." Elena studied her father for a long moment, recognizing genuine remorse beneath his carefully controlled composure. "I appreciate your honesty," she said finally, her voice softening slightly. "Forgiveness will take time, if it comes at all, but I am willing to consider rebuilding some version of relationship with you specifically, Father, separate from whatever diplomatic considerations exist between our territories." Callum's eyes filled with unexpected tears, and he nodded, clearly grateful for even this small, cautious opening toward reconciliation. The formal ceremony took place several days later, a grand celebration attended by representatives from across all 5 packs, along with countless citizens from Damien's own territory, who had come to witness the historic event. Elena stood before the assembled crowd, dressed in elegant clothing that bore no resemblance to the simple kitchen garments she had once worn, her posture radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence that had taken an entire lifetime of struggle to finally discover. Damien spoke first, addressing the assembled crowd with genuine emotion evident in every word. 6 years ago, I became king of this territory, and in all that time, I never expected to find someone who would challenge every assumption I once held about strength and worth. Elena has proven, beyond any doubt, that true strength comes not from matching conventional expectations, but from discovering and embracing whatever unique capabilities each of us carries within ourselves. I am honored, beyond words, to name her my chosen mate and queen. As the formal ceremony concluded, and cheers rose from the assembled crowd, Elena caught sight of the Crimson Moon delegation, standing among the wider gathering, their expressions carrying a complicated mixture of pride and lingering shame at witnessing exactly what they had once so carelessly cast aside. She did not gloat or seek any petty satisfaction from their discomfort. Instead, she simply stood tall, accepting the celebration and recognition that surrounded her, understanding fully, for the first time in her entire life, that her worth had never depended on anyone else's validation, whether offered freely or withheld cruelly. That evening, as the celebrations continued throughout the capital, Elena found a quiet moment alone, with Damien, on a private balcony overlooking the city, the sounds of distant music and laughter drifting up from the festivities below. "Do you have any regrets?" Damien asked quietly, studying her expression in the soft evening light. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret the years of cruelty I endured before finding my way here," she said finally. "But I do not regret the journey itself, difficult as it was. Every hardship taught me something about my own strength that I might never have discovered otherwise." "And now?" Damien asked. "What do you hope for, moving forward?" Elena smiled, genuine and unguarded, gazing out at the city that had become her new home. "Now," she said, "I hope simply to continue becoming exactly who I am meant to be, without ever again allowing anyone else to define my worth for me." Damien took her hand gently in his own, his expression carrying quiet, profound admiration. "Then I look forward to witnessing exactly who that person continues to become," he said, "for as long as we both shall live." Below them, the city continued its joyous celebration, unaware that the quiet, defective girl, once hidden away in Crimson Moon's kitchens, had finally become something far greater than anyone, including herself, had ever dared imagine, a queen defined not by conventional strength, but by resilience, authenticity, and the unshakable courage to become fully herself, regardless of who had once tried to convince her otherwise.